My name is John. I am 34 years old. For almost 6 years, I've been working rotational shifts up on the north slope of Alaska, maintaining heavy industrial equipment on the oil rigs. The work is pure hell. In the winter, the freezing wind cuts right to your bones. In the summer, it's suffocating under the gear and the mosquitoes are relentless. There were days when, after a 12-hour shift, my hands were so numb and stiff from engine grease and freezing metal that I couldn't even feel my fingers, but I never complained once. Whenever I thought of my wife and daughter waiting for me back home in the lower 48, I told myself that a man is supposed to endure a little suffering. Every month, I deposited exactly $4,000 into the account back home. Not counting the months when I pulled overtime, then it was even more. I was absolutely certain that as long as I was reliably bringing in the money, my wife, Amanda, and my daughter, Lily, would never want for anything. That particular time, our rig was scheduled for routine maintenance, and I was unexpectedly given a few days off. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted to surprise Amanda and Lily. I wanted to see Amanda's eyes widen with joy. I wanted to hear little Lily scream, "Daddy," and throw her arms around my neck like she used to. Just the thought of that scene seemed to erase half the hardships I'd endured over the years away from home. On the way from the airport, I stopped at Target and bought Lily a singing princess doll. She adored anything with puffy skirts and blinking eyes. Every time we video called, she would tug at her mom's sleeve and beg me to buy her one. And for Amanda, I picked out a beautiful, cream-colored cashmere scarf, soft, light, and elegant. I remembered how, at the very beginning of our life together, she mentioned that she loved cream colors because they felt warm and delicate. Walking up the street with the shopping bags in my hands, I was smiling to myself like a foolish man in love, full of anticipation. When the Uber pulled up to our house, it was almost noon. The sun was high. The suburban street was quiet, save for a dog barking lazily a few houses down. I quietly walked up the porch steps with my duffel bag, already imagining how I'd cover my daughter's eyes and hand her the gift. But as I reached the front door, I felt something was off. It wasn't locked, just slightly ajar. I was going to push it open gently and sneak in as quietly as possible. However, the first sound that reached me wasn't the noise of the TV or a child's laughter. It was the very quiet, dismal clinking of silverware against cheap plates, carrying a strange, heavy gloom. I slowed my pace, peeked into the kitchen, and froze. In the middle of our small kitchen, at an old table covered with a worn vinyl tablecloth, sat Amanda, Lily, and my mother, Martha. On the table was a bowl of plain, instant oatmeal thinned out with hot water, a few saltine crackers, and half a slice of cheap bologna. No soup, no proper meat, not a single egg or piece of fresh fruit. Before I could even process what was happening, I saw Amanda scoop a tiny spoonful of the watery oats into our daughter's bowl, then pick up the kettle to add a little more hot water to stretch it. Blowing on it to cool it down, she murmured, "Eat, Lily, my sweet girl. Eat up, and then Mommy will read you a story." The little girl looked down at her bowl, and her thin little voice practically sliced my heart in two. "Mommy, do we really not have a scrambled egg today?" I froze in the doorway. A huge lump formed in my throat. A chill ran through my entire body, even though it was a warm, sunny day outside. Every month I sent home $4,000. That was money earned with blood and sweat, through night shifts battling frozen machinery, hasty meals eaten in a cramped trailer, and fevers I endured alone under a blanket in the frozen north. And my wife and daughter were sitting down to a lunch so meager, you'd think the family had fallen into absolute destitution. In that moment, I should have rushed in, hugged them, and asked what was wrong. But no, the initial shock quickly morphed into wounded pride and sheer anger. I felt ashamed. Ashamed because I worked like a dog. Ashamed because anyone seeing this scene would think I was a deadbeat husband, a man starving his own wife and child. I stormed into the kitchen, slamming the shopping bags onto the table with a loud crash. All three of them jumped. Lily turned around, her eyes wide, and she screamed happily, "Daddy, Daddy's home!" She jumped up to run to me but froze when she saw the look on my face. I knew I looked terrifying. Amanda also froze, still holding the spoon, while my mother hurriedly put her cup down and looked away. I hissed through my teeth. Every word was a struggle. "Where's the money? I send $4,000 every single month. Why are you eating like this, Amanda? How are you managing the finances?" Terrified by my yelling, Lily grabbed tightly onto her mother's jeans, but Amanda didn't cry or rush to make excuses like I expected. She just looked at me with a long, exhausted stare that made my heart stop for a second. Then she gave a crooked, bitter smile, full of sheer helplessness. Her voice was hoarse. "Where is the money? Go ask your mother." Those words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I whipped around to face my mother. Martha was looking away, her fingers nervously picking at the edge of the tablecloth. Annoyance and embarrassment were written all over her face. And in that exact moment, I suddenly felt that my surprise return wasn't a family reunion, it was the beginning of the end. The moment the roof of the house I thought was secure and prosperous began to cave in right before my eyes. I stood in the middle of the kitchen for a few seconds, my head buzzing, Amanda's words ringing in my ears like hammer blows. "Go ask your mother." Just one sentence. But it made the table with the watery oatmeal sway before my eyes. And from that moment on, my memories rushed back to the day I decided to leave my wife and daughter to go work the Alaskan oil fields, clinging to the naive belief that if I just reliably sent a paycheck, everything would be fine. Lily had barely been a year old then. She couldn't speak well and walked unsteadily, clinging to her mother's pant leg, looking at me with her big, dark eyes. Amanda stood in the driveway, holding our daughter. Her eyes had been red since morning, but she tried not to cry. She just squeezed my hand tight and whispered, "Go. As long as it makes things easier for our family later, I can handle any hardship here." Those words stayed with me the whole flight. They were both a motivation and an excuse, forcing me to be strong. The first few years up north, I lived in a cramped man camp, 4 guys in a tiny room. In the winter, the draft from the window was so cold it made your teeth ache. In the summer, it was stuffy as a sauna. My job was industrial maintenance. It sounds solid, but only someone who's done it knows how backbreaking it is. Sometimes I worked late into the night, the oil seeping permanently into my skin, my back aching so badly I just wanted to drop to the floor and sleep. My hands cracked from the cold and chemicals. Once, a finger was bleeding badly, but the next morning I just wrapped it in electrical tape and went to my shift anyway. But strangely enough, I never felt miserable, or rather, I didn't let myself think that way. I had one simple masculine thought in my head. I'll suffer a bit, but my wife and daughter will live comfortably. I told myself that since the money was coming in regularly, Amanda would handle everything. My job was to work. I naively believed that by earning money, I was fulfilling the vast majority of my duties as a husband and father. At first, I kept a small amount in my personal account for emergencies, but then my mother started calling often. Sometimes sweetly, sometimes reproachfully, she'd say that a man away from home with money in his pocket could easily go astray, start spending on nonsense, and forget his family. She would say, "Send it all home. You have a wife and a mother here. We'll manage everything. Not a single penny will be wasted." Listening to her, I decided it made sense. I thought the woman who had worked her whole life to raise me couldn't possibly wish me ill. So, gradually, I began sending almost everything, leaving myself only enough for the most basic expenses. Initially, the money went to Amanda, but soon my mother started interfering in everything. She frequently FaceTimed me right as my shift ended, her voice as sweet as honey. "Son, just focus on work. Don't worry. I'm just here helping Amanda with the household. She's young, you know. She doesn't know how to budget properly for a house." I listened and felt reassured. I even thought that under my mother's guidance, Amanda would gain experience and our finances would be more secure. A couple of times Amanda hinted that money was tight at home, that there were a lot of small expenses, and our daughter was often sick, but I didn't dig into the details. Instead, I reprimanded her. I remember my response over the phone perfectly. "Don't be so critical of my mother. She's lived her whole life for her kids and grandkids. When has she ever taken anything for herself? Everything she does is for the good of our family." On the other end of the line, Amanda was silent for a few seconds, and then quietly replied, "Okay." Knowing what I know now, remembering that quiet "okay" causes me the most intense pain. Because back then, I didn't hear the resentment or the helplessness in it, the suffocation of a person who desperately wants to speak but can't. Being far away, every time I called, I only saw what they wanted me to see. A tidy corner of the living room, a babbling Lily, Amanda with a slightly strained smile, and my mother always chiming in with her usual phrases. "Everything is fine here, son. Keep working hard." Once I asked, "Do you need anything?" Amanda just smiled. "We have everything, honey. Just take care of yourself." I heard that and relaxed, and then I buried my head back in my work, believing our family was on the right track. There were even months when I pulled extra shifts and sent a bonus. I thought, Lily is growing. Amanda is alone with a child. She needs spending money so she doesn't feel deprived. I would sit in the break room trailer, eating a cold lunch out of a Tupperware container, proudly telling the other guys, "My wife doesn't have to worry about a thing back home. I send a fat check every month so she and my little girl can live comfortably." At that moment, I was genuinely proud of myself. Proud to the point that I didn't suspect my wife was already learning to lie to her husband just to hide the poverty and humiliation in her own home. In my mind, everything was perfect. I planned to work another 2 years, save up enough, move back for good, and open a small electrical supply shop where Amanda could run the register and I'd handle the contracting and repairs. I dreamed of a bright house where Lily ran around and Amanda waited at the door with dinner. I had no idea that the more money I sent, the more I was turning my sweat and tears into a bottomless pit. And the most bitter part was that while I was up there in the freezing north, gritting my teeth through the cold for my family, someone back home was quietly reaching into that pit, pulling out dollar after dollar, and I, like an absolute idiot, still believed I was the pillar of strength for my wife and daughter. Now, looking back, I realized there were plenty of warning signs even before the day I secretly returned to find them eating watery oatmeal. I just didn't want to face the truth. Or rather, I intentionally looked the other way because I was afraid that if I looked too closely, the peace of mind I clung to would shatter into a million pieces. One evening, I used my break to FaceTime home. Lily was sitting in her high chair. In front of her was a bowl of plain white rice sprinkled with some dark seasoning. She was eating it slowly with a tiny spoon. Seeing this, I immediately asked why she was eating just rice, no meat, no fish. Amanda, sitting nearby, forced a smile and said the doctor recommended something light for her digestion because she was getting over a stomach bug. Just then, my mother walked into the frame, fanning herself with a magazine, and chimed in, "Simple food is better for kids. It keeps their stomachs working right. Too much meat and fish just gives them diarrhea." I listened and mumbled in agreement. It seemed reasonable at the time. I even mentally scolded myself for being an overanxious parent. There was another incident. Amanda called me on the exact day I usually transferred the money. Her voice was hesitant, quieter than usual. "Honey, could you maybe send the money in 2 separate chunks this month instead of all at once?" I was exhausted after my shift. Hearing this, I frowned and asked, "How are you spending so much that you need it split up? It's not like we're short on cash." There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. I remember that pause distinctly. It was long and uncomfortable. But then Amanda just replied, "Never mind, let's just do it the usual way." I even got a little annoyed, thinking my wife was becoming petty and calculating. Now, remembering that, I realized she probably wanted to get at least a fraction of the money before someone else took it all. Once, I sent a care package from Alaska. It had chocolates, vitamins for Amanda, some joint supplements for my mother, and several cans of expensive imported baby formula for Lily. Sending it, I felt happy, thinking that even from far away, I was taking care of my girls. A few weeks later, I asked Amanda, "Did Lily like the formula? Are the vitamins helping?" She answered briefly that they had already used everything. I didn't press further. But that same evening, during a video call, my mother was chatting with a neighbor right in front of the camera and laughed. "Oh, that imported formula? I gave a few cans to Jason for his kid. The boy's been looking a little weak lately, needs to build up his strength." Hearing that, I just chuckled. I figured my mother felt sorry for my younger brother, and sharing a couple of cans of formula wasn't a huge deal. Now, I want to slap myself to wake up. My younger brother, Jason, was useless, lazy, changing jobs like gloves. Wherever he got hired, a couple of weeks later he'd start complaining about being tired, that the work wasn't a good fit, that his boss was picking on him. I was used to his idleness and usually ignored it, but about a year ago I noticed he started dressing completely differently. He'd post photos on social media drinking with buddies, at expensive sports bars, wearing brand new clothes and fresh boots. His hair was styled with expensive gel like he was a millionaire. When I asked him about it, he giggled. "My buddies are treating me, bro." Another time he said he fell into a little side hustle. I listened with skepticism, but then reassured myself, thinking maybe our mother gave him some savings, or maybe he'd finally grown up and learned how to hustle. To be honest, I wanted to believe it, because otherwise I'd have to consider the unpleasant possibility that the money I was sending was going to the wrong place. Over time, Amanda started calling me less frequently on her own, and if she did call, the shadow of my mother or Jason was always looming in the background. Once I asked Amanda how Lily was doing in daycare and if they had enough to cover the tuition. At that exact moment, my mother walked into the room with a smile on her lips, but a very sharp look in her eyes. "Johnny, it's already nighttime up there. Go to bed. You have work tomorrow. Everything is fine here. Don't fill your head with unnecessary questions." After a few times, I got used to it. Whenever I tried to find out more details, someone would always interrupt and cut the conversation short. I remember one night, a text message from Amanda popped up on my phone screen. "Honey, I need to tell you something. Just one line." I barely had time to read it before the message was deleted. I asked her what it was. She replied that she hit the wrong button. I believed her, because I was in the middle of a shift, my head full of work, and I just wanted to exchange a few words and get back to the rig. But now, I am absolutely certain that on that day, Amanda wanted to beg for help. She just didn't have the privacy or safe conditions to finish typing. Another time, I called home and heard my mother screaming at someone. Her voice was harsh and bossy. "This is the money John sends. I'll spend it however I want." The connection was bad at that moment, the sound muffled. I only caught that one phrase, but strangely, I didn't associate it with Amanda. I assumed my mother was arguing with someone outside a cashier, or maybe someone who asked for a loan. I never once connected those words to the reality of my wife's life. If you look at these signs individually, they seem insignificant. A bowl of plain rice, a request to split the money, formula given to a brother, a deleted text, a fragment of an angry shout. But now, putting it all together, I realized that any husband who was even slightly paying attention would have realized long ago that something was terribly wrong. It's a shame that back then, I was intoxicated by the illusion of being the ultimate provider. I turned myself into a man who only wanted to hear good news. As long as I heard everything is fine at home, I clung to that fine and kept working like a mule, proud, thinking my home was at peace. Because of that stupid gullibility, when I finally understood everything, the pain was worse than any physical blow. I realized my wife's suffering didn't start yesterday. She had been backed into a corner and isolated for a very long time, inside the very house I thought was the safest harbor for her and our daughter. After Amanda spoke those words, "Go ask your mother," the kitchen seemed to shrink. The ceiling fan squeaked. I could hear Lily's quiet, frightened breathing, and even the bubbling of the water in the old kettle on the stove sounded piercingly loud. I turned to my mother, expecting an explanation, at least one word to clear up the situation, but Martha didn't look embarrassed, like someone caught red-handed. On the contrary, she slammed her hands on the table, threw her head back, and looked at Amanda with her usual venomous expression. Then, defiantly, she said, "She sits at home with all that money and doesn't know how to budget, and now she's slandering her mother-in-law. Talk about warming a snake in your bosom." Before I could respond, there was the scuffing of shoes in the hallway. In walked Jason. He smelled of expensive cologne. His shirt was freshly ironed, his hair perfectly styled. Seeing me, he feigned genuine surprise, his eyes widening as he chuckled. "Oh, bro, when did you get back? Why didn't you text? I would have picked you up from the airport." His greasy, slick demeanor filled me with a strange disgust. I looked from his clean, expensive boots to the shiny watch on his wrist, and then back to the table with the watery oatmeal where my wife and daughter sat. In an instant, an indescribable sense of dissonance washed over me, though I wasn't quite ready to put all the puzzle pieces together just yet. My mother, sensing my silence, went on the offensive. She turned to me, her voice sweet but sharp as a knife. "You're far away, son, you don't know. Amanda has been spending like crazy lately. On formula, on daycare for Lily. I've had to chip in from my own pocket, otherwise they wouldn't have enough. With her inability to manage finances, a mountain of gold wouldn't be enough." Saying this, she smacked her lips and put on a mournful face. as if she were a poor old mother forced to patch the holes in our household. I turned to Amanda. She was still standing by the table, one hand holding our daughter's shoulder, the other gripping the edge of the wood. Her face was pale, not from weakness, but from rage suppressed to the absolute limit. My throat went dry. I started interrogating her, my voice getting harsher. "Tell me, where did the money I sent go? What does my mother mean? How are you managing the budget if my kid is eating this?" Amanda didn't scream like someone unjustly accused. She just looked at me for a long time. That gaze simultaneously angered me and made me feel intensely guilty. Then, without saying a word, she walked over to the old wooden kitchen cabinet. Digging into the far corner, she pulled out a crinkled plastic grocery bag containing a bundle of crumpled papers. She slammed it onto the table in front of me with force. Papers scattered everywhere. They were stained with oil and water, their edges curled from being hidden for so long. Amanda's voice was hoarse and quiet, but every word rang with steel. "What am I spending it on? Look, the jeans I'm wearing are 3 years old. I haven't bought anything new. Your daughter's sneakers ripped. I glued them back together myself. When she had a fever, I broke a generic Tylenol pill in half because I didn't dare ask for money to buy more. What am I spending it on? Here, look." I leaned over and picked up the papers. One was a debt ledger from the corner bodega. Another was a receipt for cheap bulk rice and beans. A third was a past due notice for Lily's daycare, with a handwritten note in the corner: "Pay within 3 days or lose your spot." Another slip was a pharmacy receipt for children's cough syrup, with several other items crossed out. These were all for such tiny amounts that in normal life, I wouldn't have even blinked at them. But in that moment, every number slapped me in the face. $3 for cooking oil, $4 for eggs, $5 for fever reducer, and a jagged handwritten line: "Vitamins for Lily couldn't buy today, short on cash." The more I read, the hotter my face felt. But this wasn't the heat of my initial anger. It was the burning heat of humiliation. The humiliation of knowing that for years I beat my chest calling myself the provider, thinking that just sending money was enough. Meanwhile, my wife and daughter were living on credit for pennies. My mother likely realized I was beginning to waver, and immediately changed her tune so fast it gave me whiplash. She slammed her hand on the table, covered her face, and burst into theatrical tears. "Oh my God, to suffer such humiliation in my old age. The money you sent, I gave it all to her. How am I supposed to know where she hides it? I've lived to have gray hair just to be accused of robbing my own son. I'd be better off dead." Jason, standing nearby, immediately chimed in like an innocent bystander. "Bro, you break your back in Alaska sending cash, and your wife is playing games. I can't believe it. Mom is old. What is she really spending money on?" Amanda probably hid the cash herself and is now blaming others. Saying this, he crossed his arms and shook his head with such righteous indignation that I felt physically sick. I stood between two fires. On one side, my weeping mother. On the other, my silent wife with a pile of debt receipts on the table. My head was spinning. Since childhood, I was used to the fact that whenever something went wrong, my mother would cry. And when she cried, I always softened. But strangely, this time, her tears evoked no pity. They only caused exhaustion and a feeling of being suffocated. Amanda looked at Martha and Jason, and then suddenly laughed. It was a very quiet chuckle, but it sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't the laugh of a victor, but rather of someone backed into an absolute dead end. She slowly pronounced, "Fine, if everyone loves playing games so much, I'll show you the whole board." Saying that, Amanda turned and walked toward the bedroom. Her steps on the linoleum floor sounded resolute, neither fast nor slow. I froze. A strange sense of dread bloomed in my chest. My mother also stopped crying, lifting her head to watch Amanda leave. Jason frowned. It was quick, but I caught it. A few seconds later, Amanda returned. In her hands was a small blue notebook with worn corners. The cover was so old the paper was curling. She held it to her chest like something very precious and secret. One look at Amanda's face in that moment was enough to understand. This was no longer about a meager lunch or a petty family squabble. I didn't know what was in that blue notebook, but I had a gut feeling it would reveal a truth I had been willfully ignoring this entire time. Amanda placed the blue notebook in the middle of the table and slowly opened it. It was obvious this wasn't something thrown together in a day or two. It was a record kept meticulously over a long period. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was surprisingly calm, the kind of calm that belongs to someone who has endured so much pain they have no strength left to scream. She pushed the notebook toward me and said very quietly, "You want to know where the money went? See for yourself." I leaned in. On the first page, there was a clear record, the date, the amount of my direct deposit, the account number, and right below that, written in small, even handwriting, time, amount taken by Martha, and the reason given. I flipped through a few pages. My heart started hammering. Every month, it was the exact same story. Sometimes the direct deposit hit the account in the morning, and by evening, almost all of it had been transferred out. Sometimes my mother said it was for a relative's funeral expenses, sometimes for her medications, sometimes for roof repairs. In one month, there was a glaring entry. Martha took $3,000, said she needed to pay off a debt for Jason. His business is having trouble. I flipped faster. With every page, my hands grew colder. This notebook wasn't a household budget like I thought. It was a diary of my wife's forced poverty. Every page told a story of how the money that just arrived was instantly confiscated, as if someone was standing at the door waiting to rob her. I swallowed hard and looked up at Amanda. She was no longer looking away. She stared straight into my eyes and said, "You told me to manage the money, but I only held it in my hands for a few hours. As soon as the transfer cleared, your mother would call me over and force me to transfer it to her. Sometimes she stood right behind me, dictating the routing numbers, terrified I might hide a single dollar." Hearing this, I whipped around to face my mother, but Martha didn't show an ounce of shame. She just straightened her back, frowned, and said in a tone as if she were discussing the weather, "I am the matriarch of this house. If I took some money to handle important family matters, what's wrong with that?" That single sentence made me flinch. It wasn't an excuse. It was an arrogant, cold-blooded confession. Amanda didn't argue with her. She just reached over and flipped a few more pages. On these pages, there were no longer large transfers, but records of requests so petty and humiliating it physically hurt to read. Asked for money for Lily's baby formula. Asked for Tylenol when Lily had a fever. Asked for new shoes for preschool. Next to each entry, Amanda had written down my mother's exact responses verbatim, as if afraid she might forget the humiliation she was forced to swallow. I read each phrase, a lump rising in my throat. What kind of kid needs that much milk? If she has a fever, wipe her down with a wet rag, it'll break, making up excuses to buy medicine. This money is for big family business, not for you to live luxuriously. Every word slapped my face. I didn't dare imagine that while I was up in Alaska, bragging to all the riggers that my wife and daughter wanted for nothing, my daughter was growing up surrounded by phrases like that. Amanda closed the notebook and looked at me. This time there were no tears in her eyes, just a bottomless fatigue. She asked, "Do you know how many times we've had a lunch of watery oats?" I've lost count. One day Lily asked me, "Mommy, are we very poor?" I didn't know what to tell her. Hearing that, I felt something inside me collapse. I remembered sitting in the brake trailer, showing off photos of my daughter, telling the guys, "My little girl has the best of everything. Her daddy makes sure of it." It turned out the child I thought was living in abundance was growing up feeling like she was in abject poverty. I sat frozen, my hands clenched into fists until my knuckles were white. But the pain didn't stop there. Amanda slowly opened the back of the notebook, pulled out a yellowed handwritten IOU and several printed screenshots of Venmo and Cash App transfers. She placed them in front of me. I looked at the recipient's name, and my stomach plummeted. It wasn't my mother's name, it was Jason's. I picked them up, my vision blurring. $500, $1,000, $2,000, transfers stretching over months. One IOU even clearly stated, "Received funds for urgent expenses for Jason." I slowly raised my head. Jason stood a few steps away. His face no longer held that slick self-confidence. His lips were dry, his eyes darting around, and the fingers of his hanging arm twitched. Amanda looked right at me and spoke slowly and distinctly. "Did you think your mother took the money to save it? Or for household expenses? No. Your mother was feeding a bottomless pit named Jason." She paused, letting a dead silence hang over the kitchen. Then she continued, her voice dropping lower, so cold it gave me goosebumps. And that's not even the dirtiest part. I froze, my heart pounding. I turned to Jason, and one look at his pale, terrified face was enough. My younger brother was hiding something even more vile than simple parasitism. And in that moment, I realized this was no longer a story about a mother being too controlling with finances. This was a family secret capable of destroying everything I believed in. Amanda's last phrase, "and that's not even the dirtiest part," pierced the thick air in the kitchen like a razor blade. The moment she finished, I saw my mother's face turn ghostly pale for a split second. It flashed by quickly, but I caught it. Jason practically jumped, slamming his hand on the table, cursing and snarling. "Stop making things up. Just because you got caught hoarding pennies, don't drag the whole family through the mud." Amanda didn't argue. She silently picked up her phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward me. Her hand was still trembling, but her gaze was strange. It held no more fear. It was cold, like someone ready to walk through the fire. I leaned in and saw a photo album on the screen. All the pictures were taken from a distance, secretly. In the first photo, Jason was holding a little boy, maybe 2 years old, standing outside a pediatrician's office. In the second, he was walking next to a woman with her hair pulled back into a low ponytail, wearing a faded floral dress, carrying a diaper bag. In the third, the two of them were walking into an older apartment complex on the edge of town. I shot my head up. Amanda looked directly at me. Her voice was quiet but terrifying. "That child isn't some random nephew. That is Jason's biological son. Your mother has known about him for 2 years." Jason looked like he was losing his mind. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone, but I was faster and blocked him. As soon as I shoved him back, he ground his teeth. The veins on his neck bulged, his eyes bloodshot as if he was ready to eat us alive. That reaction alone told me everything. Amanda wasn't lying. If he were innocent, he wouldn't be panicking. My mother was still trying to hold her ground. Her voice was harsh but cracking slightly. "Where did you find those photos? And you believe this? He held someone else's kid. So what?" But Amanda didn't let her derail the conversation. She took a deep breath and began to explain slowly. Every word was like a shovel scraping muck from the bottom of a barrel. "Over a year ago, I saw your mother packing a grocery bag with fruit, formula, diapers, and medicine, saying she was going to visit a sick friend. I got suspicious and followed her, carrying Lily. I saw her go into that apartment complex. I stood on the street and watched Jason walk out of that building holding that little boy. I heard that woman call Jason his father. I couldn't believe it, but I stood there and listened. A chill ran completely through me. I turned to my mother. She avoided my eyes, and her face lacked the absolute certainty it held before. Amanda continued, her voice growing sharper, as if she had held this in for entirely too long. "Since that day, I started watching secretly. And the more I watched, the clearer it became that your mom wasn't just visiting them, she was providing for them like they were her own household. Once, I heard her scolding Jason with my own ears. 'You're an idiot, but since you had him, you have to raise him. We aren't going to put this shame on display for the whole town.' Hearing this, I felt like someone had hit me in the chest with a sledgehammer. All these years, I was breaking my back in Alaska, enduring the cold, the humiliation, eating cheap camp food to send my paychecks home. And back home, my mother was taking that exact money to support my brother's illegitimate child, while my wife and daughter were eating watery oats. The pain in that moment wasn't about the lost money anymore. It was the absolute humiliation of a man whose own blood treated him like a cash cow. My mother, seeing my silence, hurried to take control. Her tone shifted to her usual mix of justification and guilt-tripping. "Well, the boy made a mistake. Are we supposed to let our own blood starve to death? After all, he's my own grandson. You're the older brother. If you don't help, who will?" Those words made my blood boil. I looked at her and, for the first time, I didn't see the mother I used to respect. I saw a woman who used the words "our own blood" to justify any vile act. I hissed through my teeth, my voice trembling with rage. "What blood? My daughter is your blood too. My wife is family. Why did you let my daughter eat oats with water while using my money to support Jason's secret kid?" Lily, hearing my shout, flinched and pressed herself into Amanda. Jason, realizing I was no longer protecting him, switched to shameless arrogance. He gave a crooked grin. You make $4 grand a month up north, bro. You ain't begging for change. If you helped out a little, you wouldn't die. That single sentence broke something inside me forever. Until then, I could still lie to myself that my mother was just blinded by her love for her youngest, that Jason had just stumbled out of stupidity. But hearing that, I understood. In their eyes, I was never a brother to be loved. I was just an ATM working in exile, a faucet you just had to turn on and cash would flow. But Amanda wasn't finished. She quickly wiped the corners of her eyes, looked at me, and said heavily, "Don't think it ends with that woman and the baby. That's only a fraction of it. Your mother and Jason poured way more money into something else. Something that, if it blows up, won't just leave us broke, but will drag this whole family under." I froze. My anger hadn't even subsided, yet a new, even heavier dread rose in my throat. I looked at the blue notebook, the phone on the table, and then at Amanda's pale, resolute face. I realized what I had just seen was only the first layer. Beneath Jason's dirty secret lay a pit deeper and blacker, ready to swallow us all if I didn't face the truth right now. Before I could even process the shock of Jason's secret child, Amanda reached into the kitchen drawer and pulled out another stack of papers, bound by a red rubber band. The way she held those papers made my stomach drop. If the blue notebook was a chronicle of my wife being suffocated by pennies, this stack of papers carried something much heavier. It was as if it held the very thing that could collapse our entire house. Amanda placed the papers in front of me, her voice hoarse. "You think the money only went to Kelly and the baby? No, that's just the tip of the iceberg." I leaned in. On top were several handwritten IOUs. Beneath them were stamped loan documents, copies of IDs, and even printed screenshots of text messages between my mother and a man named Frank. Reading the first few lines, a cold sweat broke out on my back. The first text was right there. "Don't worry, my son works in Alaska, sends cash every month, we're good for it." Below it was my mother's reply. "Yes, just float me this time. John will send the deposit at the first of the month. I'll pay you a chunk back immediately." I looked up at my mother. She was pale, but still trying to maintain a hard exterior. "Those are adult matters, business stuff. You read it, but you don't understand how things work here." Before I could ask, Amanda pointed to each document. Her voice was steady, but each word landed like a lead weight on my chest. "Besides the money for Kelly and the baby, your mother, using the excuse that you work in Alaska and send steady cash, got involved in high-yield investment scams. She took out high-interest payday loans and borrowed from hard money lenders. Then, she gave Jason the money to open that barbecue joint." I listened, a ringing in my ears. All these years, I thought my money was going to my family. Turns out, it was used as a billboard. My mother flaunted my income to build trust so she could borrow money all over town. My mother still tried to argue, her voice growing shriller as she was backed into a corner. "I did it so Jason would have a business. Otherwise, he'd just be floating around and eventually he'd be an even bigger burden on you." Amanda laughed, a bitter, strangled laugh. "You wanted him to be independent, so you burned other people's money on him. What kind of independence is it when he drank all the profits, let his buddies eat for free, and then used the bar to cheat on his baby mama?" That sentence made Jason flinch, but this time he didn't dare interrupt. He just pressed his lips tightly together, his eyes darting around. Amanda continued, her words layering more filth onto my shattered pride. "Jason's barbecue joint lasted less than 6 months. At first, your mother was so proud. She'd call you up north and brag about how her youngest had finally found his calling, that he had a head for business, and soon he'd take the financial burden off his older brother's shoulders. That was the big family business she used as an excuse to squeeze every dime out of me. But the place was only busy for the first few weeks. Then Jason started bringing his friends in, eating and drinking on the house. Vendor bills piled up. Plus, he started having an affair with Kelly right there in the back office, which all the regulars gossiped about. People came once and never returned. Nobody wanted to sit in a place that constantly smelled of stale beer and trashy drama. The restaurant went under, and the debt fell on your mother. Terrified you'd find out, she didn't say a word to you. Instead, she started squeezing me dry. Every month, the second your money hit the account, before I could even buy groceries, she forced me to transfer almost all of it. She left me just crumbs so the three of us could barely survive until the next payday, like tossing a dog a bone so it doesn't starve to death while it guards the house. Reaching this point, Amanda's voice broke. She turned and stroked Lily's hair as the little girl pressed against her. Then she continued, "One night, Lily ran a really high fever. She was burning up. I ran to your mother with her in my arms, begging for some cash for an urgent care copay. She screamed at me, 'It's just a cold,' making up excuses to go to doctors and waste money. That money is needed for a loan payment. If I'm one day late, they'll drag my name through the mud." The moment she finished, I couldn't hold it back anymore. I grabbed a plastic chair and kicked it as hard as I could. It flew across the room and smashed against the cabinets. Lily jumped and started crying. Amanda hurriedly pulled our daughter close and backed into the corner. I stood there, breathing heavily, as if an invisible hand was choking me. It was my daughter's crying that brought me back to my senses, but the rage didn't evaporate. I grabbed the stack of papers from the table, flipping through numbers that danced sickeningly before my eyes. Payday loans with predatory interest rates, bad crypto investments, equipment liens for the restaurant, all of them bore my mother's messy signature. On one page was a line that made my hands shake. "Son works on the oil rigs, receives guaranteed monthly deposits, 0 risk of default." I stared at that sentence for a long time, then slowly turned to my mother. I practically growled, "Mom, did you use my name as a joke, like a cash cow to borrow money against?" My mother remained stubborn. Her voice was shrill, yet she tried to sound righteous. "I am your mother. Everything I do is for this family." I laughed, but the sound was more terrifying than a scream, because even now, she didn't believe she was wrong. In her twisted mind, anything done for the family gave her the absolute right to take my money, use my name, and starve my wife and daughter without a shred of guilt. And right at that moment, as I was still shuffling through the debt papers, Amanda delivered the final blow. She spoke quietly, but every word drove into my skull like a nail. The debt isn't just our internal family problem anymore. Frank, the hard money lender she borrowed the most from, is getting suspicious. He said if he doesn't have his money by the 1st of next month, he's coming to our house. And not just for cash. He threatened to take the house. I froze. All the background noise vanished. I could only hear my own heartbeat. Take the house. That meant not only was my money stolen, not only had my wife and daughter been forced to starve, but the very roof over their heads, the roof I thought protected them from the world, was about to be ripped away. If I hadn't come home early, in a few weeks this whole thing would have exploded in front of the neighbors, right in front of my daughter. In that moment, I truly understood this wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a ticking debt bomb, and strapped to this bomb wasn't just my name and my sweat, but the entire future of Amanda and Lily. I was still standing rooted to the kitchen floor, the words "take the house" swirling in my head. Suddenly, from the driveway outside, came the screech of tires, like a knife dragging across concrete. Right after that, a gruff man's voice yelled out without any hesitation, "Martha, you home? Get out here, we need to talk money." The second that shout rang out, all the blood drained from my mother's face. The hand that had been picking at the tablecloth shook so violently her fingers tapped against the wood. Jason reacted even faster. He took one look toward the front yard and scurried toward the back door like a rat smelling a cat. One look at their reactions was enough to understand. The guests in our driveway weren't just friendly acquaintances. I walked straight out onto the front porch. 3 men had already opened the gate and walked into the yard. In the lead was a guy in his 50s, with a bony face, deep-set eyes, and thin lips. He was smoking a cigarette. Behind him were 2 younger, broad-shouldered guys who radiated the aura of professional debt collectors. The man in the lead scanned the yard and stopped his gaze on me. He smirked, and there wasn't a drop of friendliness in it. "Ah, the golden boy is back from Alaska. Perfect timing, just in time to pay off your mother's debts." Before I could ask anything, he tossed a thick folder onto the patio table. Papers fanned out everywhere. Some had notary stamps, others were handwritten ledgers, some were stained with coffee. I leaned over to look, and reading the first few lines made my vision go dark. Promissory notes, high-interest personal loan agreements, clauses enforcing daily penalty fees, and the most terrifying of all, a document clearly stating, in the event of failure to pay within the agreed term, the creditor has the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings on the property listed as collateral. A cold chill ran down my spine, but the shock didn't end there. On several documents, my mother had neatly added handwritten phrases that burned my eyes. My son works in Alaska, sends money every month. Our family has a stable source of income. In case of issues, my son assumes responsibility. This meant she didn't just use my name as a reference to borrow easily. She had essentially made me a default guarantor. She turned the sweat I poured out in the freezing cold into bait to get people to hand her cash. I looked up, clenching my jaw, and addressed the man. "You're Frank?" He took another drag of his cigarette and blew the smoke in my general direction. He nodded. "The one and only. I assume your wife just showed you the texts." I gripped the papers in my hand and asked, "How much total?" Frank didn't answer right away. He sat down on one of the patio chairs as if he owned the place, slowly put out his cigarette, and then smirked. "With the late fees and interest, as of today, a little over 150 grand. If I hadn't listened to that old woman painting a picture of her golden boy son up north, I wouldn't have been stupid enough to let the balance get this high. 150 grand. The number hit me right in the gut. On the porch, pressed against the wall, stood Amanda holding Lily. The little girl didn't understand everything, but she saw the angry strangers and clung to her mother's neck in terror. Her eyes were welling up with tears. That sight caused me more pain than any number could. I knew this wasn't about money anymore. This was about the roof over my wife and daughter's heads, the fragile world my daughter had left. Suddenly, my mother dropped to her knees right in the middle of the yard, clasping her hands in a begging gesture, and crawled toward Frank, sobbing. Her voice cracked. "Frank, please, give us a few more days. We have the money coming. My son is home. He'll sort it out. Johnny, son, save your mother. Pay him a chunk now. I'll figure the rest out later. I promise I'll figure it out." The words "I'll figure it out later" made my brain explode. For years, every disaster in this house started exactly like that. Do it now, we'll figure it out later. Borrow it now, we'll figure it out later. And the people left holding the bag at the end were always my wife and daughter. Before I could say anything, Frank nodded toward the backyard. "Why's he hiding? Where's Jason? Drag him out here." Jason, realizing he couldn't wait it out, timidly stepped around the side of the house. Head down, but his eyes were still darting around. Seeing him, Frank snorted. "Here's the guy burning through the cash, not this old lady. Opened a barbecue joint with big dreams, kept his side piece happy, paid her medical bills. And whenever he fell short, he just pulled from the pot. Then he lost the rest of his loan money playing underground poker. I don't give a damn about your family drama, but I want my money." I whipped around to face Jason. Up until now, I only knew about the secret kid and the failed restaurant. I thought that was enough humiliation. Turns out, behind that was gambling, high-interest loans, paying for a mistress, covering her hospital bills. All of it fell on my mother, and my mother sucked it straight out of my money, out of my daughter's meals. This meant every cent I earned breaking my back fed not just irresponsibility, but a bottomless pit of my younger brother's vices. Jason, seeing the look in my eyes, started stammering. "Bro, I thought I could flip it and make it back." I cut him off with a roar. My voice was ragged. "You tried to make it back using my daughter's milk money? Using my wife's grocery money?" He shut his mouth. His face went pale as a sheet. But my mother was still on her knees, grabbing onto my jeans with one hand, pointing at Jason with the other, crying, "Save your brother. He was just being foolish. He's not an evil boy." I listened and wanted to laugh. What kind of foolishness lasts for years? The kind of foolishness that uses a brother's money to support a mistress, a secret kid, gambling debts, and a failed business, and then puts the entire family out on the street. Frank stood up, brushed off his hands, and said in an icy tone, "I'm giving you exactly 3 days. If you don't have the cash in 3 days, I'll be back. And don't act surprised when I start pulling strings on this property." Saying that, he kicked the stack of papers at my feet, as if reminding me this wasn't a bad dream. Then he turned and walked toward the gate. His 2 guys threw a look at the house as they left that made the skin on the back of my neck crawl. I stood in the middle of the driveway. The gate had just clicked shut. At my feet was a pile of debt. Behind me was my mother's weeping, Amanda's heavy breathing, and Lily's quiet sobs. Never in my life had I felt that our small yard was so suffocatingly tight. I always thought I went to Alaska to lift my family up, but in that moment, I realized this family had been dragging me down to the bottom for years. I was just finally opening my eyes at the edge of the cliff. The gate barely closed behind Frank, and the yard hadn't even settled into silence when I spun around to face Jason. The stack of debt papers was still sitting on the patio table. The wind rustled the IOUs, and the sound felt like someone mocking me. I stared dead at my younger brother. My voice was raw from anger. Tell the truth. How much did you take from me in total? What else are you hiding? I thought that, being backed against a wall, he would at least drop his head. But no. Jason froze for a few seconds, and then suddenly exploded. He pointed a finger straight at Amanda's face and yelled, "This is all because of her. If she hadn't stuck her nose in our business, this house wouldn't be such a mess." I froze. Not out of surprise, but at the sheer, lightning-fast cowardice of it. A minute ago, he was turning pale in front of a loan shark, but the second he felt he might be cornered by me, he immediately shifted the blame to Amanda, seeing her as the weakest link. Typical coward behavior. If you can't defend yourself, drag someone else into the line of fire. Jason, getting worked up, yelled louder, making sure the neighbors could hear. "Who do you think managed the money in this house?" "She did. She had her hands on it. She's the one who tipped off Frank to come here. She's intentionally turning us against you so she can divorce you and take all the money for herself." His voice was piercing. His face turned red, spit flying everywhere as he hurled these disgusting, arrogant accusations. My mother, hearing this, grabbed onto it like a life preserver. She immediately chimed in, her trembling hand pointing at Amanda. "He's right. Ever since she married into this family, we haven't had a day of peace. She acts all quiet and sweet, but she's scheming. She saw you making good money in Alaska, and now she's turning a husband against his mother and brother." The way she screamed, you'd think the real disaster all these years had been Amanda, and not the spoiled younger son she'd coddled to the bone. Amanda stood on the porch with Lily in her arms. Her face was as white as a sheet. I saw her hand grip our daughter's shoulder so tightly her knuckles went white. She didn't cry. She just stood there in silence for a few seconds, swallowing the massive lump in her throat. Then she lifted her head. Her eyes were red, but her voice was surprisingly clear and steady. "You robbed his wife and child blind, and now you're trying to pin it on me?" The moment she finished that sentence, Jason, like a rabid dog getting its tail stepped on, roared and lunged forward. It all happened so fast I only saw his arm swing back, followed by a loud, sharp smack. He slapped Amanda across the face with all his strength. Her head snapped to the side. She stumbled. Lily let out a blood-curdling scream, clinging to her mother. Her tiny voice broke in sheer terror. "Don't hit my mommy! Don't hit my mommy!" That scream was the spark that detonated my rage completely. I stopped thinking. I lunged forward and kicked Jason squarely in the stomach. He collapsed onto the pavement with a groan. Before he could even try to get up, I was on top of him. The veins in my arms bulged. I hissed through my teeth. "If you ever touch my wife again, I'll put you in the ICU." Jason had never seen me like this. For years, in his eyes, I was the older brother who only knew how to work. The guy who listened to Mom, tolerated his younger brother's antics, and at worst, would yell a little and cool off. Pinned to the ground, his expression changed instantly, but cowards like him squeal louder the more scared they are. He tried to squirm away, wheezing and yelling. "You're beating up your own flesh and blood over some woman. Did she brainwash you?" I leaned down inches from his face. My voice was a low growl. "What kind of brother are you? You stole my wife and daughter's grocery money to pay for your mistress, your gambling debts, and now you dare hit my wife? You have the nerve to call yourself my brother?" Every word felt like I was tearing out my own insides and looking at them. It was painful, and it was shameful. Out by the street, Frank and his guys still hadn't left in their truck. They were probably watching the circus act unfold. I caught a glimpse of Frank shaking his head, while one of his guys smirked. They were definitely looking down on my family. My mother threw herself at Jason and started wailing as if I was beating him to death, completely ignoring what he had just done to Amanda. She tried to pull me off, screaming, "Are you trying to kill him? Over this woman you've lost your mind, Johnny." I let go of Jason, but didn't take my eyes off him. Amanda had already retreated to the far corner of the porch with Lily. With one hand she covered her face. With the other, she tightly hugged her trembling daughter. A bright red handprint was blooming on her cheek. Looking at that mark, I felt something snap inside me permanently. Lily looked up at me, crying, and asked in a quiet, heartbreaking voice, Daddy, are they going to kick us out of our house? That question stopped me cold. For a child that young to ask such a question meant she had accumulated way too much fear in her short life. She wasn't afraid of the adults fighting. She was afraid of being thrown out on the street. I was about to walk over to them, but Amanda subtly shook her head, as if telling me to stay where I was. Then she quickly wiped the corner of her mouth, took a deep breath, and slowly said, "Did you think you were the only one who knows how to keep receipts?" Saying that, she reached into the pocket of her jacket hanging by the door and pulled out an old smartphone with a cracked screen. I was stunned. Amanda unlocked it, tapped the screen, and looking straight at Jason, she said, "I figured out a long time ago you'd pull something like this, so I kept this." Jason, whom my mother had just helped off the ground, turned ghost white upon hearing that. Before I could ask what it was, Amanda hit play. From the tinny speaker of the old phone came a scratchy, but completely clear voice. It was Jason's voice. There was no mistaking it. "Just take the cash John sends and use it for Kelly and the kid. As for the poker debt, let Mom invent an excuse to squeeze some more out of her. If John finds out, just blame it all on Amanda. He trusts Mom, not his wife, so don't even sweat it." I stood paralyzed. My mother's mouth dropped open in shock. Jason looked like he had been struck mute. Out by the truck, even Frank had turned his head. Just one short audio clip, but it completely cut off all of Jason's escape routes. He was no longer just a parasite and a screw-up. He was a man who had long premeditated how to frame his sister-in-law if his crimes were ever exposed. I looked at Amanda. For the first time since I walked into this house, I clearly realized one thing. The woman standing in the corner holding my child was not someone who would just silently take the abuse. She endured, she suffered, and she secretly gathered evidence, every wound, every word, waiting for the day when they could no longer shut her up. And I truly understood in that moment that this battle wasn't just about getting the money back. This was the moment when every dirty mask in my family was ripped off in broad daylight, with absolutely no room left for denial. Once the audio recording finished, it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the yard. The neighborhood birds seemed to stop chirping. Even Lily stopped crying. Only her red, teary eyes darted between her mother and me. I stood rooted to the spot, my ears ringing. Jason's recorded words kept echoing in my head. Every word was a driven nail. Blame it all on Amanda. He trusts Mom, not his wife. I turned to my mother. Martha's face, which only moments ago was full of venomous confidence, was frozen like a mask. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. And Jason, the younger brother I had considered a screw-up but still family since childhood, stood before me like a total stranger. The aggressive energy he had a moment ago when he hit Amanda was entirely gone. He was slowly backing away, his posture sagging. Amanda still held Lily. The cracked phone rested in the palm of her hand, small and battered, yet in that moment, it felt like the only instrument of justice she and our daughter had. She looked at me for a long time, and then she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud or harsh, but every word carried the weight of lead. "Do you think I saved this because I wanted revenge? No. I saved this because there were days when I knew that if I didn't save myself, no one else would." I couldn't answer. The lump in my throat felt like a jagged rock. Amanda took a deep breath and began to explain, speaking slowly, as if untying knots she'd carried in her chest for years. She said there were so many times she wanted to call me in Alaska and tell me everything, but my mother or Jason was always hovering, monitoring the calls. Once, Amanda had barely started, "Honey, things here are," when my mother snatched the phone with a laugh, interjecting, "It's nothing. Your wife is just pouting over nonsense again." After that, Amanda realized that without hard evidence, I would never fully believe her words. Then Amanda revealed something that made my heart seize up. One day, my mother brought her a stack of papers and told her to forge my signature on them since I was up north, claiming it was to quickly resolve some household utility issues. Amanda hadn't had time to read it all, but she saw confusing legal jargon and a clause about financial liability, which set off alarm bells. She pretended her wrist hurt and said she'd sign it later. My mother had screamed at her with ice in her voice. "It's just a signature. Why are you making it a problem? You're scared of your own shadow." If Amanda had blindly signed it back then, I would currently be drowning in debt, not just in theory, but legally, with notarized papers. Hearing that, I felt my scalp tingle with dread. I thought I went to Alaska for the future of my family. It turned out that while I was breaking my back in the freezing cold, my wife at home wasn't just starving and enduring humiliation. She was actively dodging bear traps set in her own living room. I looked at Amanda, at the red mark still visible on her cheek, at Lily, who had buried her face in her mother's shoulder. An acute sense of shame crushed my chest. All these years, I thought I was the main sufferer, the main pillar, but in reality the one who silently patched the holes, swallowed her tears, and hoarded receipts, audio clips, and evidence just to preserve a fighting chance for our daughter, was Amanda. Amanda leaned down, kissed the top of Lily's head, and then looked back up at me. Her eyes were red, but her voice was painfully resolute. Did you think I tolerated it because I'm weak? No, I tolerated it because I knew that if I broke, there would be no one left to protect Lily. I couldn't let my child be not just hungry, but motherless. That sentence felt like a physical slap to my face. Yes, I was legally present. I was her husband, the father of her child, but all these years, she was the only one fighting for the two of them. Out by the street, Frank still hadn't left. He probably didn't expect a routine debt collection to unearth this much filth. He had picked up his paperwork from the patio table and silently listened to everything from start to finish. When Amanda stopped speaking, he looked at my mother, then at Jason, and his expression changed. The aggression of a debt collector was still there, but mixed with unmistakable disgust. Frank slowly drawled in an icy tone. I came here for my money, not to help you scam your own blood. You have 1 week. If you don't pay up in a week, I'm taking all this paperwork straight to the sheriff's office. Don't bother getting on your knees then. The moment my mother heard the word sheriff, it was as if all her bones dissolved. She collapsed right in the middle of the driveway, her hands flat on the concrete. Her face was lifeless. She wasn't sobbing anymore, just whispering in a broken voice, "Frank, have mercy." But he didn't even look her way. Jason, for the first time since I arrived, looked genuinely terrified. He had no more arrogance, no desire to argue. He kept licking his lips, shooting glances at me, and muttering, "Bro, let's talk in private. We're brothers, man." I looked at him and felt a strange emptiness inside. There was no flash of anger, like when I tackled him, nor a drop of the pity I used to feel, just a coldness that seeped into my marrow. I realized that if it wasn't for Amanda gritting her teeth and hoarding evidence, if I had come back a few days later, even as the house was being foreclosed on and we were dragged into a police station, I would probably still idiotically believe my wife just didn't know how to budget. I walked over and stood right next to Amanda and my daughter. I put my hand on Amanda's shoulder softly, but firmly. Then I looked at my mother, at Jason, at this whole yard I once considered a place of happy reunions, and said slowly and clearly, "Hear me right now. From this day forward, nobody in this family dares to touch Amanda or my daughter. My money, my life, I will reclaim them myself. As for you, you can pay for what you've done on your own." Saying that didn't bring me relief. It just felt like crossing a line I never dared cross before. From that moment on, I wasn't just a deceived husband. I knew I stood on the other side now, on the side of my wife, my child, and the truth. And I also knew that the debt bomb, the police, and the reckoning hadn't even finished exploding yet. It was only just beginning. I thought that after that evening, after the audio was played in the yard, after my mother and Jason's true faces were exposed, they would at least stay quiet out of fear for a while, but I was wrong. I still underestimated their level of malice and stubbornness. There are people who, when cornered, don't admit fault. They only fight and bite more viciously looking for a way out. The next morning, I woke up very early, having barely slept all night. Amanda was holding Lily, curled up on the edge of the bed. Our daughter slept restlessly, occasionally twitching and whimpering. I sat leaning against the wall. My head was total chaos. I only had one thought. I needed to act fast, decisively, and secure Amanda and Lily before my family could invent something else. But as soon as I stepped outside, I felt something was wrong. Brenda, the neighbor who owned the local diner, was watering her lawn. When she saw me, she suddenly turned away, pretending not to notice me. That silence was worse than any gossip. It was the silence of people who had heard a story and, not knowing what was true or false, preferred to keep their distance to avoid the mess. I walked a few steps further, and my Uncle Pete, who lived a few streets over, pulled into my driveway in his truck. He rolled down the window, looked around cautiously, and said quietly, "John, when did you get back? What's all this noise? Your mother's been crying on the phone to the whole family since 6 a.m. She says your wife stole all your money, and now she's manipulated you into beating up your own mother and brother. The whole family is buzzing." Hearing this, my blood boiled. My instincts were right. While I spent the night figuring out what to do, my mother had already launched her counterattack, the exact same old playbook. Tears, complaints, playing the victim, and weaponizing neighborhood gossip to stab Amanda in the back. I clenched my jaw until it hurt. It's true what they say. You can be poor in money, but being bankrupt in conscience is what's truly terrifying. I quickly walked back toward the backyard. I could already see it was crowded. A few relatives on my dad's side were sitting on patio chairs. There was Uncle Pete, who had just parked, Aunt Nancy, and a distant cousin who spent his whole life sticking his nose in other people's business. In the middle of the yard, wearing a ratty cardigan, sat my mother, leaning against a post, holding a hand to her heart and wiping her tears with the other. Jason stood next to her. A bruise was forming on his cheek from my punch yesterday. He was intentionally displaying it as proof that his own brother had beaten him half to death. As soon as I walked up, my mother threw her head back and shrieked so loudly the neighbors definitely heard. "Are you happy now, Johnny? Because of that woman, you've disgraced me in front of our whole family. Ever since she married you, we haven't had a day of peace." Her voice was piercing and cracked perfectly. Anyone who didn't know better would think her daughter-in-law had been torturing her for years. Before I could open my mouth, Uncle Pete stepped in, looking important, like a judge holding court. "John, family matters should be handled behind closed doors. Whatever happened, this is your own mother and your own brother. You can't put your mother out on the street over a woman. What will people say?" I listened, and I wanted to laugh a bitter laugh. It's true. When you only listen to one side, the one crying the loudest is always right. Jason, feeling emboldened by the support, ramped it up. He pulled an old canvas duffel bag from under a chair and slammed it into the middle of the yard. Inside the bag was some of my mother's old silver jewelry, bundles of loose cash wrapped in rubber bands, and a couple of old bank statements from closed accounts. He pointed a finger toward the back door, where Amanda and Lily were standing inside the screen door, and yelled, "Here's the evidence!" Amanda packed this to make a run for it. I caught her in time, and when she got caught, she started making up stories to blame me and Mom. I looked at the bag, then at his face. In a split second, I understood. This was a crude but very realistic setup. If you can't disprove the truth, create a new, louder, more scandalous lie, so people get confused and forget how it all started. It's a tactic as old as time. The only painful part was that it was being used against my wife in my own backyard. Amanda stood, holding our daughter. Her face was chalk white. Lily was so scared she was clutching her mom's shoulder for dear life. I saw Amanda's shoulders tremble, but this time, she didn't retreat. She pushed open the screen door and stepped out onto the patio, still holding Lily with one arm. Her voice was hoarse, but crystal clear. "Jason, if I'm a thief, why didn't you call the cops last night? Or did you need to wait until morning to gather an audience, set up chairs, and put on a show for the public?" The moment she asked that question, the relatives sitting around froze. I saw it clearly. Aunt Nancy stopped fanning herself. Uncle Pete frowned. Jason stuttered for a second, then angrily shouted, "You arrogant bitch." But that shout couldn't cover up the massive plot hole he had just exposed. Because Amanda was right. If there was a theft, why no police? Why wait for an audience? I didn't let them continue the circus. I pulled out my phone, switched it to video record, held it up right in front of them, and said loudly and clearly, "Whoever wants to say something today, say it to this camera. Speak clearly so I can take this straight to the sheriff's department, and we won't have to repeat or twist anything later." That single sentence completely shifted the atmosphere. The relatives who had been so opinionated immediately shrank back. The distant cousin who was about to speak turned away the second he heard the word sheriff. Jason shut his mouth, and my mother, who had been wailing like she was on her deathbed, quickly changed her tone. She stopped screaming and started crying quietly, whispering, "Johnny, I just want peace in the house. Don't involve the police. I'm old, I won't survive the shame." That sentence made my blood run cold. because I realized she wasn't afraid of destroying our relationship. She was afraid of evidence, of the law, of the truth leaving the confines of this yard and this family. In that moment, I fully accepted a bitter truth. I couldn't speak to them in the language of emotions anymore. With people who use family ties as a shield for their crimes, only hard evidence and the law can protect Amanda and Lily from being eaten alive. After the scene with the fake stolen bag, the crying, and the relatives, I thought I had seen the absolute bottom of my mother and brother's true nature. But no, what I had seen was just the noisy surface. The thing that could truly destroy Amanda and Lily, the thing that could turn me from a victim into an unwitting accomplice, was still quietly sitting somewhere in this house, waiting to explode. While the relatives were still lingering in the yard, some pretending they were trying to mediate, others exchanging awkward glances, Amanda quietly tugged my sleeve. Her hand was ice cold. She didn't say anything, just gave me a quick look and walked back into the house. I followed her. As soon as we closed the bedroom door, Amanda knelt by the bottom drawer of our dresser, moved some old winter blankets, and pulled out a battered manila envelope. The way she held it made my heart clench. She held it not like a stack of papers, but like a burning coal, knowing it would burn her, but forced to carry it anyway. She handed me the envelope. Her voice was shaking. I wanted to give this to you last night, but there were too many people. I was afraid your mom and Jason would see and rip it away. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of photocopies. As soon as my eyes scanned the first few lines, my heart hammered against my ribs. My name was clearly printed at the very top of the document. Under the section, guarantor, consenting to the collateralization of the property in the event of borrower default. I thought I was hallucinating. I brought the page closer, reading line by line. Every word made the hair on my neck stand up. This wasn't some verbal IOU or a handwritten note. This was a full home equity line of credit HELOC agreement backed by a private lender with my mother's name, the lender's name, and the legal description of our house as collateral. And the most terrifying part, under the section confirming my consent, there was a signature with my name. I stared at that signature, my vision blurring. It was jagged, a clumsy attempt to copy the signature from my ID and employment contracts. A stranger might think it looked similar, but I knew it wasn't mine. It was an amateur forgery, but good enough to fool someone who didn't know better. I looked up at Amanda. She was biting her lip. Her eyes were red. A few days ago, I saw your mom hiding this in a box of winter coats. I got suspicious, sneaked it out, took it to FedEx, made copies, and put the original back. I was terrified that if I took the original, she'd notice. I listened, and an icy dread settled over me. This meant my mother didn't just take my cash, borrow at predatory rates, invest in scams, and fund Jason's dirty life. She actually dared to forge my signature to mortgage the very roof over her granddaughter's head. In that moment, I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt a coldness that seeped into my bones, because I realized this was no longer family drama. This was a felony. It was a matter of forged legal documents, real threats of foreclosure, and potential jail time. I grabbed the stack of papers and walked straight back out to the yard. No one expected me to return so fast. The relatives hadn't even shifted in their seats. My mother was still dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and Jason was standing with his arms crossed, looking like the ultimate victim. I silently slammed the papers onto the patio table. They spread out, the wind catching their edges. I pointed at the documents and asked in a quiet but rock-hard voice, "Who signed my name on this?" The entire yard went dead silent. My mother, catching a glimpse of the paperwork, flinched. The color drained from her face entirely. Jason's reaction was even more obvious. His eyes went wide, and he immediately looked at the ground. That was enough for me to know, but I wanted to hear them say it. I grabbed the main signature page and shoved it right in my mother's face. "Mom, look at this. What is this? Who signed for me?" My mother started stammering, her lips trembling. I don't know. Probably the men who gave the loan." She couldn't finish. I slammed the stack of papers against the table so hard the coffee mugs jumped. For the first time in my life, I spoke to my mother in a voice so cold and alien I didn't recognize myself. "It wasn't enough to take my cash. Now you forge my signature to sell the roof over your granddaughter's head. Are you even human?" The relatives standing around exchanged horrified looks. Nobody stepped in to preach about family anymore. Uncle Pete leaned in, picked up one of the pages, read a few lines, and let out a heavy breath. "This ain't a family argument, Martha. This is forgery." That single sentence made my mother's face sag. Jason was still trying to deny it. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers from my hand. I stepped aside, pointed at the date next to the signature, and snarled. On the day these papers were signed, I was working a night shift on an oil rig in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. I have the geolocated time cards to prove it. What else are you going to deny? Jason froze. His mouth opened and closed. His face turned purple. Backed completely into a corner, he suddenly exploded. He yelled, "Stop making a scene. So what? We sell this house. We buy another one. It's not the end of the world." He didn't even realize what he had just said. The whole yard gasped. He had just confessed to the entire plot. These weren't suspicions or Amanda's paranoia anymore. They truly planned to sell the house out from under us and rehouse me and my daughter somewhere else like unwanted furniture, just to cover his debts. I saw Amanda behind me grip Lily's shoulder. The little girl looked up at her mother with terrified eyes. Just seeing that made my chest ache physically. This house, the one I broke my back in Alaska for, the one I considered a fortress for my wife and kid, in the minds of my mother and brother, it was just an asset to be gambled away to save the golden child from his own filth. From that second on, I knew every boundary was gone. I had proof of forgery in my hands. The villains had exposed themselves in front of the extended family. The story had moved out of the realm of in-law squabbles and straight into the jurisdiction of the police, the law, and the very real threat of losing our home. There was no going back. I stood in the middle of the yard with the forged HELOC copies, looking at my mother, Jason, and the dumbfounded relatives. I had never felt such coldness in my soul. It wasn't the kind of anger that makes you want to break things. It was a freezing, sobering, and resolute calm. I folded the papers, put them in my jacket pocket, and stated clearly, "Whoever wants to defend them, but I'm taking this to the sheriff's station right now. Whoever committed the crime will pay the price." As soon as I finished, my mother seemed to lose all motor function. She dropped to her knees right on the patio, grabbing my jeans, and began to wail like a drowning person clutching a lifeline. "Johnny, please don't turn me in. I'm an old woman. I made a mistake. Have mercy on your mother, just this once. I'm begging you." Her voice shook, tears and snot mixing on her face. She looked pathetic. If this were the old me, seeing her on her knees would have absolutely broken my heart. But strangely, in that moment I only felt exhaustion, terminal exhaustion. Because behind her mistake were months of Amanda and Lily going hungry, months of Lily being sick without medicine, and that ringing slap my wife took right in front of me. Jason, seeing that my mother's tears weren't working on me, instantly changed tactics. He stepped uncomfortably close, ground his teeth, and whispered so only I could hear. "You make a scandal out of this. You embarrass yourself. Everyone will know you work in Alaska while your house is a total disaster. You'll be the laughingstock of the town." I turned and looked him dead in the eye. I had never seen so much cowardice and malice combined in my brother's eyes. I replied shortly, quietly, but firmly. "I'd rather be embarrassed once and clean out the rot than let my wife and daughter live in shame for the rest of their lives." I turned away and asked Uncle Pete to come with me to the sheriff's station as a witness. But before he could even answer, the sound of frantic footsteps slapped against the pavement near the driveway, followed by a woman's voice crying and yelling for Jason. Everyone turned. Standing at the gate was Kelly. She was holding a toddler in her arms. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were swollen, and her clothes looked slept in. It was obvious she had come a long way in a state of absolute desperation. Her exhausted appearance made the already suffocating atmosphere in the yard feel even heavier. Kelly didn't greet anyone. She walked straight into the yard, dropped her diaper bag onto a chair, held her baby tighter, and pointed a shaking finger right at Jason. Her voice cracked with rage and betrayal. "Keep hiding. Go ahead. You haven't given me money for your son's milk in 3 months, and your mother has been calling me trash behind my back. I came here today so everyone knows exactly who you people are." My mother, hearing this, looked horrified. She lunged toward Kelly, trying to silence her. "Shut up. Why did you come here? Are you trying to destroy this family?" But Kelly wasn't the timid girl Amanda had photographed from a distance. She stepped back, holding her son tightly. Her face was pale, but her voice was sharp. "Destroy it? Your house has been destroyed for a long time. I was just too stupid to see it until now." Saying that, Kelly pulled a crumpled stack of papers from her bag and threw them on the patio table. Ultrasound printouts, hospital bills for the birth, an incomplete birth certificate, several Venmo receipts, and even photos of Jason sleeping in her cheap apartment on a bed with a floral bedspread. The relatives, who had been sitting with such self-importance earlier, now had their eyes bugging out of their heads. I froze. Amanda gripped Lily's hand tighter, yet another layer of filth was exposed in this house. Kelly cried and talked, pouring out all her accumulated resentment. She explained how my mother met with her multiple times in that cheap apartment, handing her cash with one hand while ordering her to stay quiet, endure, and wait with the other. She'd say, "Have the boy, raise him. Jason will marry you eventually." She promised that as soon as the older brother in Alaska sent more money and they cleared some debts, she would help Kelly open a hair salon so she and the baby could have a decent life. Kelly spoke, and then laughed a bitter, hollow laugh. "I was an idiot. I believed it. But it turns out you two just used me as a dumpster to throw your money into. And when the money ran out, you threw me out like trash." I listened, and my head roared. This meant they didn't just lie to Amanda. They didn't just lie to me. My mother and Jason used Kelly as a pawn in their sick game. They took my money to cover Jason's sins, and then used that same money to feed Kelly lies, forcing her to stay quiet and raise a child in the shadows, just so they could maintain the illusion of a respectable family. And then Kelly said a phrase that made the entire yard freeze. She whipped around to face my mother, her eyes bloodshot, and hissed through her teeth. "Do you remember what you told me? You told me your son in Alaska is an idiot. You said all you had to do was cry, and he'd wire the money immediately. You said we just had to hold out for a couple more paychecks from John, and everything would be fine." I listened to that, and it scared me, but back then, I swallowed it. The moment she said that, I felt my feet bolt to the ground. All the humiliation rolled into a tight ball and crushed my chest. I wasn't hurt about the money anymore. I was hurt because, in the eyes of my own mother and brother, I truly was just the idiot in the cold, the fool breaking his back so they could take turns shaking me down to the last dime. The relatives who were trying to force a reconciliation earlier now looked at Jason like he was covered in disease. Aunt Nancy shook her head. Uncle Pete sighed, his face flushed red with embarrassment for the whole family. One of the neighbors who had wandered over to watch the spectacle said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear, "You can feed a hungry man, but you can't fix a rotten soul." That sentence, spoken without screaming or cursing, cut deeper than any slap. Jason tried to argue. His lips moved a few times, but he couldn't form a single word. My mother could no longer stand on her own 2 feet. She clung to the wooden porch post just to keep from collapsing. For the first time since I walked into this house, I felt the dynamic completely flip. If earlier the relatives looked at me and Amanda like ungrateful children, now, right in the middle of the yard in front of the extended family, a loan shark, and the child Jason wouldn't even claim my mother and Jason were completely and utterly unmasked. I clenched the forged papers in my pocket and heard my own heavy breathing. There was no need to yell anymore. No need to argue. Now, not only Amanda, but Kelly, Frank the lender, the forged signatures. It all dragged the true faces of my mother and brother into the broad daylight, and I knew that from this moment on, nobody in this town could ever pretend this was just a misunderstanding between in-laws. It was an abscess that had finally burst, and the infection was spilling out into the street. In that moment, I had zero doubts left. What lay before me wasn't just a family argument. It was a mountain of interlocking evidence. Amanda's audio recording, Frank's loan documents, the forged HELOC papers, Kelly's chaotic but brutally honest testimony, and the dead pale faces of my mother and brother when the truth finally caught them. If I showed mercy now, the very next people backed into a corner would once again be Amanda and Lily. I took a deep breath and addressed the entire yard. "Uncle Pete, are you coming with me? Frank, you too? I'm going to the sheriff's station to file a report today." The yard went silent. My mother jerked her head up, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe I would actually cross that line. Jason took a half step back. His lips twitched, but there was nowhere left for him to run. We drove to the county sheriff's precinct that same afternoon. It was a hot day, dust kicking up on the back roads, but I didn't feel any of it. I only had one thought in my head: end this once and for all, break this vicious cycle. Don't let my mother and Jason twist the narrative with tears and gossip to attack Amanda again. Everything happened faster than I expected. The mere fact that my signature was forged on property collateral documents elevated the case out of civil family dispute territory. A detective was called in immediately. And that's when I felt the difference between a backyard full of yelling and an interrogation room where there are official records, where every word you say is written down, and where you have to answer for your lies. At first, Jason tried to worm his way out. He sat leaning back in his chair, bouncing his leg, muttering nonsense about a misunderstanding, claiming our mother probably just asked someone to sign as a proxy, that the barbecue joint just had bad luck, and there was no gambling involved. But the more the detective pressed, the more tangled Jason got. The detective asked where he got the seed money for the business. Jason said he borrowed it from a buddy. When asked for the buddy's name and phone number, he choked. When asked about the Venmo transfers to Kelly, he first denied it, claiming he was helping a friend out, until the birth certificate and texts were brought up. When asked about the underground poker debts Frank mentioned, his face turned ash gray. I sat across from him and watched his usual swagger completely melt off his face. My younger brother, who had arrogantly sneered, "If you helped out a little, you wouldn't die now," sat huddled, his lips white, sweating profusely. Every sentence contradicted the last. The more I looked at him, the more it hurt. Not out of pity, but from the realization that all these years, my mother had enabled a man so corrupt he believed his older brother's sacrifices were simply his birthright. My mother sat in the corner of the precinct waiting room, sobbing. She alternated between begging the deputies and begging me. She kept repeating the same phrase: "Johnny, save your brother. He was just being stupid. He's not evil. He just made a mistake." I listened to her, and I felt more profound sadness than anger. Even in this moment, her biggest fear was losing her youngest son. She never once turned to Amanda. She never asked if my wife was hurt. She never remembered the months her daughter-in-law and granddaughter ate watery oats in her own home. Eventually, after a long interrogation, the detective placed Jason under arrest pending further investigation: forgery, felony theft by deception, wire fraud, and suspicion of illegal gambling. When the detective announced he was being booked, I saw Jason's legs give out. He turned to me. His eyes were red, his lips moving as if he wanted to say something. But for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to save him. I didn't say a single word in his defense. Jason was led away in handcuffs under the stunned gazes of the people in the lobby. My mother watched him go, and it was as if something inside her finally snapped. She collapsed onto the linoleum floor and wailed as if the world was ending. In the past, her tears would have manipulated me. But in that moment, I just stood and looked down at her. I had one simple, brutal truth in my head. She grew this monster herself, watering it with my money, her blind favoritism, and the starvation of my wife and daughter. Jason's arrest was one thing, but the debts hadn't disappeared. They hung over us like a black cloud. I knew that if I completely washed my hands of it now, Amanda and Lily would still be the ones to suffer the fallout, but I wasn't an idiot this time. I wasn't going to grab a shovel and blindly clean up everyone else's mess like I had for years. I spoke clearly to the detective, to Frank, and to my mother. I would participate in unraveling the mess to ensure the house wasn't foreclosed on, but I wasn't going to shoulder the burden as if nothing happened. The inherited plot of land out in the county, which was in my mother's name, would have to be sold. Jason's expensive truck would be liquidated. Anything of value they owned would go toward the debt. Whoever owned the asset was paying the price. Hearing this, my mother looked like she was losing her mind. She jumped up, her eyes blazing. "You want me to sell your grandfather's land?" I turned to her. It hurt, but my voice didn't waver. "Mom, what do you need the family land for, when you already sold out the dignity of your children and grandchildren?" The waiting room went completely silent. I felt those words slice through the last remaining thread connecting my blind, obedient loyalty to the man I had to become today. Amanda hadn't intervened once. She just stood nearby with Lily in her arms. Her face was exhausted, Her eyes were so tired they no longer had the strength to argue. That silence hurt me more than any screaming match. It proved this woman had been through far too much. She no longer needed to win against my mother and Jason. She just needed a safe place for her child. In front of the authorities, in front of Frank, and to myself, I said it one last time. From this day on, nobody touches my money except Amanda. I will not send another dime to my mother to do whatever she wants. If I have a legal obligation to assist her, it will be done transparently, through a managed account with strict limits. Nobody gets to hide behind family to suck the blood out of my wife and daughter ever again. It wasn't just about cutting off the cash flow. It was a complete severing of the toxic, sacrificial mindset that had been drilled into me since childhood, the idea that a man just works and the wife and kids just have to endure whatever happens. Only on that day did I realize that being a man isn't about how much cash you wire home. It's about where you stand when your family is being pushed off a cliff. That evening, when we finally walked out of the sheriff's station, I didn't feel relief. I felt like I had survived a hurricane, intact on the outside, but completely hollowed out inside. Jason was in jail. My mother was broken. The family land would be sold. The debts would be paid with their own assets. And I, for the first time in my life, realized that protecting my home didn't mean sending a paycheck. It meant having the courage to amputate the toxic elements attached to it, even if those elements carry the title of mother or brother. After those chaotic days, I didn't immediately return to Alaska. I called my foreman, took an extended leave of absence, and stayed home to help Amanda with the legal paperwork, settle the remaining issues with Frank, and most importantly, just be present with her and my daughter. For years, my role as a husband and father existed only on a phone screen, short FaceTimes, quick check-ins during shift changes, and then back to the grind. Now, sitting in this house, looking at every corner, the kitchen, the bowls Lily ate from, I realized just how long I had been absent. One evening after dinner, Lily was sitting on the living room rug, coloring in a book. She sat very quietly, cross-legged, her little head tilted over the paper, occasionally turning a crayon over in her fingers. I watched her for a long time. Suddenly, she looked up. Her dark eyes met mine, and she asked very quietly, "Daddy, we aren't going to eat the hot water oatmeal anymore, right?" That question hit me straight in the heart. There was no whining in it, no reproach, no tears, but exactly because it was so quiet and innocent, it hurt so much I couldn't breathe. I pulled my daughter into my lap. For the first time in my life, I cried in front of my child. Not the way men cry in movies, with loud yells or dramatic sobs. The tears just fell on their own hot, full of shame and heavy with remorse. I hugged her tight and said through my tears, "No, baby girl, never again. Daddy is here now, and nobody is ever going to let you and Mommy live like that again." I knew in that moment I wasn't just saying it to comfort her. It was the overdue vow of a father who finally understood the true cost of his own ignorance. That night, after Lily was asleep, I took out all my bank statements, debit cards, financial documents, and even my Alaska employment contract, and placed them on the table in front of Amanda. I didn't beat around the bush, and I didn't speak down to her like a boss giving orders. I just looked at her and said slowly and clearly, "From today on, you control the finances. Not because I'm delegating a chore to you, but because I trust you. I've been wrong for way too long." Saying that, I felt my soul lighten just a bit, but also ache, because I knew those words should have been spoken years ago. Amanda didn't burst into tears. She just sat in silence for a long time. The light from the table lamp fell on her thinned-out face, making her eyes look even deeper. Then she looked up and asked a very quiet question, one that might sound ordinary to a stranger, but to me, felt sharp as a scalpel. "Do you really trust me? Or are you going to change your mind in a couple of months when your mom cries to you again?" I lowered my head. There was no question more accurate, and no question I deserved more. I answered quietly but without flinching. "If I am ever that blind again, I won't deserve to be your husband, or Lily's father." Amanda looked at me for a long time, then got up and went into the bedroom. A minute later, she returned with a small brown ledger with a worn binding. She slid it across the table to me. "I've been hiding this for a long time. I didn't want to have to use it, but I needed it just in case we were thrown out on the street one day." I opened it and froze. It was a savings passbook in Amanda's name. The balance was small to me, but the notes in the margins made me stop breathing. Money from altering dresses at night. Money from selling baked goods to neighbors. Saved $40 this week on groceries. Skipped my own asthma inhaler refill. A woman, pushed to the point of feeding her child watered-down oats, had been secretly scraping together pennies, just so her daughter would have a fighting chance if they were ever thrown out. I held that passbook, my hands shaking. It was in that exact moment I finally, completely understood. I was never the protector of this house. I merely sent money and gave myself permission to feel comfortable. It certainly wasn't my mother, who claimed to care for the family while hollowing it out from the inside. The person who truly stood in the storm, patched the leaks, and swallowed her own tears so this house wouldn't collapse, was Amanda. A few days later, I took the two of them out to dinner at a nice place. Not some overly expensive, stuffy restaurant, but a clean, cozy diner by the river. Simple wooden booths, a light breeze coming through the open windows. The evening slowly settled over the town. Lily was eating a plate of eggs and bacon, and with every bite, her eyes lit up with joy. Amanda ordered a hot bowl of soup and a sandwich, eating slowly, like someone who hadn't been able to sit and enjoy a meal without looking over her shoulder in years. I sat across from them, watching, a lump forming in my throat. There are things so ordinary that you only begin to value them when you almost lose them forever. A full stomach, a child's laughter, a wife's gaze with the hypervigilance finally fading from it. It turned out these things were worth far more than all the digits in a bank account I used to be so proud of. Before I flew back up to Alaska to finish the last few months of my contract, I did two things. First, I rerouted my entire salary and all savings into a joint account that Amanda controlled directly as the primary. Second, I legally drew up papers separating our immediate family's assets, putting the house in a trust, ensuring no outsider, no matter their blood relation, could ever use it as leverage again. I didn't want Amanda and Lily to ever again have to live on the fragile hope that maybe things will be okay. I wanted everything locked down, transparent, and ironclad. It was the only way to pull my mistake up by the roots. I also went to see my mother one last time before my flight. She had aged terribly in just a few days. Her back was hunched, her eyes sunken, and her voice lacked all of its previous authority. She looked at me for a long time, as if she had a million things to say but didn't know where to start. And I, after everything that had happened, didn't want to talk much either. I just stood in front of her and said calmly, "I am still your son. But from this day forward, I will never let you decide the fate of my wife and daughter again." I walked away, not because I had no love left in me, but because there are boundaries that, if you don't build them yourself, the people you cherish most will pay the price. It might seem like my story ends there, but in reality, it opened my eyes to a completely new understanding of family. I used to think my grinding work in Alaska was the ultimate sacrifice. I was proud of myself, thinking that as long as I labored far away, everyone at home would automatically live in peace. But now I know, money cannot save a home if the man sending it also hands over his judgment, his trust, and his responsibility. Sometimes, a family doesn't need a timely wire transfer. They need a husband who knows how to see, a father who knows how to listen, and a man with enough presence of mind to stand his ground. The person who kept our home alive through all my years of absence was none other than Amanda. And perhaps the most painful yet truest lesson I learned from all of this is exactly that.